we did not expect to have a full house. Yeah, so give yourselves a round. We thought we were going to sit around today and just share our stories with each other. So I'm Pamela Lipscomb Gardner. I'm the Library Media Specialist here at Wilson. I am a 73 graduate of Wilson, and I'm really excited about this project. I called one of my classmates from 1973 and said, Mary, we have to get up on this project. Can you write the grant? And this, I'm going to introduce Mary Giffen.
Hello. So, my maiden name is White. My parents are here in the audience, but I did graduate with Pam. And what has kept me in touch with Wilson is partly that my kids all went here and graduated in the 2000s. And so I've stayed involved and have reacquainted myself with Pam. And about 6 years ago, we worked together on a somewhat different project, which I won't go into, which involved trying to archive a lot of the wonderful historic materials that are in the old beacons and old yearbooks. Anyway, so that's how we stayed in touch. We did write the grant with help from not just myself, but others. And we got it in, and we got it. So that's what's supporting this. You see all the names of the organizations that contributed, and we're going to be using it to do what Pamela suggested, which is to bring forth information that doesn't exist anywhere right now on paper or in oral archives.
So our deliverable for this project is to record the history through the alumni of the school, and also to produce a video of this panel discussion with the alumni. So I am so grateful for these 6 people who agreed to tell their story tonight. Right? Let's give them all a applause. And tonight our moderators are 2 young people who are also students and alumni. And I'm going to have you introduce yourself and take it over from here.
Ladies first.
Hi, thank you so much for having me. My name is Elizabeth Hubner. I am a junior here at Wilson. I'm really excited to be here. Thank you.
And hello, my name is Christopher McFadden Gooding. I graduated Wilson in 2012. So I was at Old Wilson up into this new building for all 4 years. And as we're getting started, again, I would like to thank our panelists for being here. And I want to start off by, can I ask, by any order, can you give us your name, the area you came from, and the time and the years you spent here at Wilson?
Okay, so I have 3 sets of names, 2 which are public. When I was here at Woodrow Wilson in 1967, 68. Oh, the brain is going already. I didn't get my nap. And here I was known as Lord Lorenzo Callender II. But in the community, because of my position now, I'm the Honorable Baba C. GMS. I'm Baba C. Griot Master Storyteller. So if you call me Baba C. or Callender, it's fine. Or His Imperial Majesty. It's okay. So I was here in 67, 68, and I'll talk more about that later.
I was part of the busing to Wilson in 1968 and graduated in 1970. And I am proud to be on this panel to talk about the experiences. There was an article in the Washington Post a couple of months ago, I think, about Wilson, and I wrote a letter to the editor about that. And this actually was published and was talking about how black girls were being pulled out for their dress code more so than their white counterparts, and that just triggered a memory that I had when I was here, and the same thing was happening to us. So that's my story, and I'll tell you a little bit more later.
Hi, my name is Renier Rivers. I'm a senior here at Woodrow Wilson High School.
Nice try.
No, I graduated. All right. Yes.
We know what area you're from. Elizabeth.
I graduated in 1972. I was raised over in the Petworth area, 15th and Barnum Street. So I spent my 3 years here in Wilson, a year or so after they started the desegregation program.
Oh, give me real quick. I forgot to tell. Hello.
I forgot, I'm from the Parklands area, which is kind of like middle southeast. And I was supposed to tell you something else, but I forgot what that was, so I'll take the mic back when I remember. I'm allowed.
Hi, I'm Joe Shapiro. I arrived at Wilson in the fall of 1968, graduated in 1971. By the way, I'm also the parent of 2 Wilson graduates. My daughter Eva who graduated in 2016 and Lena graduated in 2013. I grew up down the street on Chesapeake Street, and so went to Janney and Dion Wilson.
My name is Roz Timberg. I graduated in 1969. I went.
Pick the mic up, closer
to you. We grew up on Porter Street and went to, my brothers and I, Hearst, Deal, and Wilson. And have a few memories.
My name is Clinton Scott. I arrived at Wilson back in September of 1966. At the time, I didn't know I was self-bused, but I was.
You too.
And I arrived here quite by accident because my neighborhood high school, McKinley Tech, had said, we're not accepting any more students. So that sort of left me in this gray limbo. Now, having attended Jefferson Junior High School, I had someplace to go. So I wanted to know where that place was. And they said, well, you can't go to McKinley Tech, your neighborhood school. We're going to send you to Woodrow Wilson. And I said, Woodrow Wilson? Where's that? So I lived in North Michigan Park. My parents, they're both 91. They still live there.
All right.
So I found out quick and in a hurry where Woodrow Wilson was, because I'd never heard of it. And we'll go into more detail later, but I remember my first day almost like it was yesterday.
Number one, I didn't know I was desegregating Woodrow Wilson. I got here because my parents told me that's where I was going. And so several things happened. You guys have heard of Vincent Reed? Mm-hmm. Well, he and I bumped heads my entire time here at Woodrow Wilson. And I had been accused of something that I had not done. And the students told the teacher it wasn't me. And, but they still sent me to him. And the first words out of his mouth was, you either apologize to her or we'll send you back to the school where you belong. Now, I didn't know I was an activist / militant, but I said to him, are we not in Washington, D.C.? He said, yes, we are. I said, the nation's capital? Yes, it is. I said, my parents pay taxes. I'm supposed to be in whatever school they send me to, so I'm exactly where I belong. He sent me home. It was one of those few times where my dad and I have a very strange relationship, but my mom tells me when she told my dad what happened, I don't know who he talked to, but I was in school the very next day. I thought I was going to get a vacation. But I was in school the very next day. Now, the thing is that people grow and evolve. Vincent Reed and I did not get along. He would later become principal of Woodrow Wilson and then superintendent. And as superintendent, I thought he was doing some very nice things. I said, oh, this man is doing some nice things. He's gone. And then he was. But I also had a math teacher that did not like black students and made no attempt to hide it. I almost became a professional mathematician. This man, I realized he was not going to help me. Whenever I asked him a question, his response would be, you should have been listening. I was listening, sir, but I didn't understand you. Well, then you should have been listening and taking notes. So I tried to transfer out of this class. But back then, a teacher had to sign off for you to get out of the class. He never bothered to tell me that he didn't sign off. So I'm taking another class in the place of it. And at the end of the year, found out I have an F in whatever, I think it was algebra. It was algebra. Me. I taught algebra, trig, and calculus when I got older, okay? I was a professional tutor. So I had to go to summer school. At the end of the first day in summer school, the instructor said, "What are you doing in my class taking up a seat that some other student can use?" And I wound up helping him teach the class. My other thing, and I'm not going to take up all the time, but you asked me what it was, I had an English instructor that also didn't like black students, but she was a little bit better at hiding it. So we were supposed to be doing Midsummer Night's Dream, and I had been cast in the lead role. 2 days later, I had been demoted to a servant with maybe 3 or 4 lines. So I asked her, "Why have you changed my role?" She says, "Because you need to learn to speak proper English and not like you were in the street." I said to her, "I have a most extensive vocabulary." I said, "When people are looking up things in the dictionary and can't find it, they come to me. And my parents would be most surprised to hear you say that I need to learn to speak." She actually said speak good. I said that need to learn to speak good, and I'm sure you meant speak well. So I took it to the office. I don't know what the conversation was, because it turned out that every black kid in her class had been demoted to either servants or no lines. By the end of the week, we discovered that we were no longer doing Midsummer Night's Dream. And we did something else. We didn't do a production, we just did a reading, and I got cast back in the leading role.
I think some of my experience mirror his. I remember after walking through the door, getting over the culture shock, because I'll tell you, when I walked through the door for the first time, I was panic-stricken. I didn't find one student who looked like me. This is 1966. And like I said, I was the pioneer. I was self-bussed. So I remember running down these hallways, trying to find someone who looked like me, because I thought I was in the wrong school. I said, I can't possibly be at Woodrow Wilson in Washington, D.C. There's no one who looks like me. So I bumped into a teacher, and she said, "You are at Woodrow Wilson." And I remember breathing this deep sigh of relief, because it was a long way back home. I didn't want to be in the wrong school to start off with. So that was day one. And then I encountered some of the faculty that you alluded to. It was very interesting. One teacher, who will remain nameless, said to me, "You know, students who look like you, they don't do too well at Woodrow Wilson." I made up my mind right then and there, I'm going to ace your class. The first grade I got, like I said, I can remember this like it was yesterday, was a B+. And I remember being very disappointed. Every quiz, every test, every final, every midterm after that, I aced her class. So I was looking for an A on my report card, and I saw this B+. I said, this isn't adding up right. I should have an A. So I confronted her, and she told me, "You know, I don't give out A's." That was my first experience of realizing that grades were not merit-based, they were political. And highly subjective.
I was here remember certainly in the end of '68 when Martin Luther King was assassinated, and the things happening around town. I think they closed the schools for a few days, and when we went back, National Guard were all around. Certainly compared to Hearst and Deal, I had friends that were diverse. One thing I remember, we were told when traveling in Virginia to a party or an event, driving in a car, not to have a mixed group of people, or you were likely to be pulled aside and whatever. I was on the yearbook and, you know, in clubs, and I've always felt kind of weird because I was I had friends in the different groups. And I felt like, you know, usually people were in one group or another and had lunch with one group. And I remember also, I considered, thought about transferring out of Wilson to Western High School, which is now Duke Ellington, because I did not like both some of the stresses and things, but the social pressures. There were, you know, kids who were wealthy and you wanted to dress a certain way.
So I would say the event I remember was after Kent State, the school, we went on strike. And Matt Finucane was the president of the student council. Matt is here, wave your hand. And led this student strike. And I think you can sort of sum up Wilson, the way we were. From that, by the way, I'm a journalist, so and I started on the Beacon, and here's a copy I kept. Here it is, Week of Strike seizes Wilson, with a picture of Matt Finucane there with the microphone outside addressing us. But it sort of sums up the way we were. So I'm reading this. We had student demand. So this is the thing. We were so optimistic. You know, 1970, we thought we were changing the world. Here we were at this school. You know, this integrated school. We thought we were these pioneers of integration. We were changing the world, and we just thought we were going to be able to do anything. So here's the demands that the Wilson students had. 1, an immediate end to the war in Vietnam and American expansion into Cambodia.
All right.
2, an end to the repression that has resulted in the shooting of 4 students at Kent State by the National Guard. And as further evidenced by political trials going on in this country, we mentioned Bobby Seale and the Black Panthers. And we had a third demand that actually was a drop, that we wanted to abolish the ROTC program here, and the student council actually voted against that and said anyone should have the choice to be in the student council. But anyway, so it was sort of a glorious moment. We had this sort of teaching, we talked about this, we were optimistic. We had this moment though where black students felt that the strike leaders had sort of ignored them and not put in thought about issues that were important to black students, and eventually we added the thing about Bobby Seale and the Black Panthers were added. But this, so that sort of showed that often we thought we were being inclusive and we weren't, and we weren't always inclusive, but there was just that sense of optimism here that we were a class that was changing the world.
I graduated in 1970, and I was part of the busing here. And one of my classmates is here, Joan, from 1970, Joan Flyer. And I remember first being terrified when we were told we had to transfer to Wilson. I went to Roosevelt High School, and we could walk to Roosevelt. That was my community. I had gone to West Elementary, McFarland Junior High, and that was my community. And I remember actually crying, dreading the fact that I had to come to Wilson. And some of the things that really stick out, at the time, we had to wear uniforms for gym, and each school had a different uniform. And our uniforms were green, I remember, from Roosevelt. And we were allowed to still wear our Roosevelt uniforms, but we got picked on by the gym teacher, constantly called out. And it was so bad that I went home and complained to my father. And I remember him to this day coming to the school and confronting her. And I remember something he told me, because the first thing that she said to him was, "I'm not a racist." And
Okay.
And I remember my father telling me, if anyone tells you without asking if they're not a racist, they're a racist. And I remember also, what year was that walkout? Was
1970.
19, what was it? What month?
May of 1970.
May, okay, because, yeah, I remember us walking out, and I had mentioned this to a couple of classmates, but I couldn't remember why we walked out. And I thought it was in the fall when we first got here, that fall of ’68, but I guess it must have been 1970. But there was a lot of tension, but also it broadened my horizons. I mean, I got to have white friends, and you know, when I went to AU, I wasn't as shell-shocked when I came to Wilson when I went to AU. But one thing, the reason I went to AU is because my brother went to AU, and he sort of guided me through the process. But I remember a counselor telling me, "Well, you'll do good working with your hands." Yeah. So those are the things that really stick out in my mind. But I do remember our prom, and we had this band that was not the popular band of the time. The popular band of the time was this band called the Young Senators, and next door, Eastern was having their prom in the same hotel at the Sheraton where we were having ours. So at some point, we kept hearing all this music coming from the next door, and so all the black students, we left our prom and went over to Eastern's prom.
Simulation.
And so those are the things that really kind of stick out in my mind.
Being raised at 15th and Varnum, everything we knew, our entire world was within a couple of blocks. Powell School was a walk 2 blocks away. So we spent 6 years in Powell Elementary. McFarland, 3 more years. I actually didn't know McFarland was on the other side of Roosevelt because I'd never gone that far in all my years. But spent 3 years in McFarland. And was looking forward to going to Roosevelt, but then in '69 things changed. So we're being told that we are going to be bused to school. Now my idea of busing back in that day was based on what I saw in the media. Black and white TV, us being bused miles and miles and miles and miles away on a little orange bus through all kinds of uncomfortable terrain, walking into we didn't know what. First day we got on the bus, it was an express bus, went up 16th Street, shot up Military Road, we were here in 10 minutes. There were no National Guard outside. I knew where the front door was because it was right there where they dropped us off. We walked in and it was a different world, because as I said, when we were raised in that little small area of DC, the Safeway was 4 blocks around the corner.
You had a Safeway?
Yeah, 14th and Upshur.
We had a jumbo.
14th and Webster. So, and our clothing store was a walk away. Everything we did was a walk away.
Yeah.
The movies was, okay, we saved our 25 cents and walked to the Tivoli Theater and the Savoy Theater. That was our entire world until 1968. So when our world changed, our views had to change. I was not a political activist as a child. I was a child. I was 14 years old. I played, I worked, I went to school. I saw Bobby Seale. I saw the Black Panthers. I saw what was happening all around the world. But we were not in the rural South, so I wasn't so much worried about what was happening when kids were bused in the South, but I didn't know. So when I came here, having been only around people of color for our schools, in junior high and high school, and I see the diversity, I wasn't afraid, I wasn't nervous, because we had our neighbors. Everybody on the west side of 14th Street was with me. So at lunch, I sat with them. Just like anyone from this neighborhood sat with their close friends who they grew up with. Just like people who were further up to the north did the same thing. Eventually, we started meeting each other and talking to each other. And to me, that opened my mind, because I was never afraid, but I was never an activist either. But I knew who I was. I knew my blackness. So I wasn't afraid to walk up to someone. But it took time. But over time, you're taking classes with people, you're doing certain things with people, so you kind of grew closer. But my biggest, greatest memory was Ed Cannon. Ed Cannon was a social studies teacher. I think he was my homeroom teacher for all 3 years. If not, I know I must have been there all 3 years. Every morning I started my day with Ed Cannon because he was dashiki. He had his big afro. And he made us feel well because there was music playing all the time. You walk in, and as a music lover, you walk in, you're singing, your day begins with comfort. So no matter who you ran into, yes, there were teachers who thought differently of us, who thought less of us. But when you start your day like that, it's like having someone push you out the door saying, you can do this. So I was blessed. I don't have any horror stories, partly because I worked all 3 years after school. I was gone. Somehow I ended up being prom king. I don't know how that happened in '72.
Because he was so bad.
But because I was gone most of at 3 o'clock, I pretty much gone because I worked. So I really wasn't a political activist. But the thing I did get out of being in Wilson those 3 years was that it kind of prepared me for the world. Because all of a sudden you're in the work world, you're in school world outside of Wilson, and oh yeah, he's different from me. He's got different hair than I do, but he's about the same as I am. And even though he may feel that way, and the person next to him, and at the workplace, we all felt that there was someone who may have thought less of you, but I think more of me. So one thing I did get out of Wilson was some pride in myself that prepared me for whatever else might have to fight.
Well, the next thing I wanted to ask you, after listening to your stories, a commonality that I heard was fear of the unknown and the experiences that when you walked in, you didn't know what exactly was going to happen. And I think that during this time, how did your family navigate you through this struggle? And also, how did you make friends throughout this time here?
For me, I was raised by a single parent. So she was up in the morning gone before I even walked to 16th Street. And I was home before she got home unless I was working. So I didn't have my mom to help me shape myself in that sense.
I'm not here.
How I drew closer to people was the same way all people draw closer to people, through the commonality. Sports, girls, music, the things we like. So I noticed, and I'll never forget a guy named Brett, white guy.
Well, his name was Brett.
Who came to us. I don't remember his last name, but I know he just kind of came to us because we partied, because we laughed a lot, because we were funny. And that clique came. There was another Hispanic American guy, Jose Cejas, who played bass in the 3 years I was there. And because of our connection with music, we're in a band together. So we draw closer by the same things everybody else draws closer to, those things we have in common. Because in the long run, we find there's a lot more we have in common than we don't.
I'm very curious. Were a lot of you politically active during the time that you were here?
Yes.
What types of things did you do to protest and stand up to anyone who gave you a hard time here?
So it was the late 60s and the beginning of the 70s, so yes, so that was all important. I think being here, being at Wilson, it felt like a political act. A lot of my neighbors in AU Park, you know, they left DC, they sent their kids to private schools, so there was something political about even being here. Yes, but being political, we did things, we raised money, we taught at the, I ran a program where we were teaching kids at the H.D. Cook School. We did lots of things in the community, and so when Matt Finucane was the head of the student council, he was very political. The council was very political, and I remember it was a big year. So I was a year behind Matt, and in my senior year, it was a big issue that the student council was not political, and we editorialized a lot about that in the Beacon, that they were interested in more in dances and trash cans and things like that.
I had two older brothers, 6 and 8 years older, that went to Wilson way before me. And they were active in the core and local civil rights movement, testing lunch counters, picketing real estate owners and and places that wouldn't admit blacks. And actually my closest friends didn't go to Wilson. I had known them from earlier school, or living in my neighborhood. Actually this goes, Wilson was a relief to me from Deal, which had a very right-wing conservative vice principal, was putting everybody in detention for no reason. One day, I forget, someone decided to have a demonstration. One of the issues was the quality of food in the cafeteria, but other issues were added on too, partly some of the things that this vice principal did. And so we walked out, we were out of the cafeteria during lunchtime. Later that afternoon, I think that vice principal called the whole school in to give a lecture to everybody that about this can't happen. But one of the parents of at Deal was a reporter for the Washington Post and wrote this up. And my brother, who was at Berkeley, and some other friends who had graduated from Wilson who were at Berkeley, and it was the year of the demonstrations, free speech movement. The Berkeley Senate, Student Senate, passed a resolution in support of Alice Deal's demonstration. And sent that letter. I got a copy of that letter. I don't know if I showed that to this, for some reason, to this vice principal. And he called me into his office and we had this discussion, you know, if you don't like this country, why don't you move to Russia? Wilson, even though I felt kind of too much pressures, you know, no time for fun because you had to do all these things to get into college and join all these clubs. But I mean, I also had a good group of friends.
Well, it's time to be real. As I recall, my day began, you sure this is on? Okay. My day began at 4:30 in the morning. Self-bust.
I like you.
By the time I got here, I was tired. And once I came through the door, I'm going to be honest with you. I'm not going to pull any punches. Wilson, I treated it like a business.
Gotcha.
Okay? I came here for a purpose, to get a good quality education. No nonsense, didn't have time for it. Because my day began at 4:30. And when I came home, it was hitting the books until 11:30, midnight, and getting back up and repeating the same cycle Monday through Friday. Saturday, my day began at 4:30. I found myself working at all of the various country clubs in this area. Congressional, you can't name a country club that I haven't worked. Bethesda Chevy Chase, Lakewood.
Caddy.
I was a houseman. I was the one
What's a houseman?
who cleaned the toilets.
Oh, we had another word for that.
Okay? I cleaned the toilets and did all of the grunt work from 8:30 to 4:30. Saturday, and Sunday. And then, when that shift ended, I took off my gray uniform, I put on black pants and a white shirt, I became a busboy or a waiter. And I worked from 5:30 to 10:30 at night. So there wasn't any time for socializing or developing deep friendships. Wilson was a business. I was there to accomplish a specific purpose. I worked to put myself through school, so I had to pay my own way. I didn't have time for extracurricular activities outside of the intellectual kind.
When I came here, I met a lot of different people, and I think my year here at Wilson opened my eyes to the fact that there were white folks that didn't like us. And I didn't care, as long as they didn't get my way. Now let me explain that. Getting my way meant impeding my ability to get a quality education, impeding my ability to walk safely in the street. You didn't want to serve me at your restaurant? I had no problem with getting up and letting everybody know why I left the restaurant and calling everybody I knew to call everybody else to let them know about that restaurant. Didn't have a problem with that. DC has the infamous distinction of being both one of the most segregated and desegregated cities in the United States of America simultaneously. But I was navigating my way through Wilson and asking for the books, Langston Hughes, Paul Ernst Dunbar, Zora Neale Hurston. I always say Thurston, but because I'm always thirsting for more. That's my story. You know, I was looking for the Paul Robesons. I was looking for the only science fiction writer at the time was, I think, Paul Delaney. I think that's his name. And his publishers, he was very light-skinned. And the way his publishers would do his pictures, you thought he was white. You know, he would discuss it, but you thought he was white. So I'm coming here, meeting all these different people, learning about Asian, Japanese culture, teaching people about Australia, learning about that the girls who invite me to the parties were being, yes, you know. So I think in many ways Wilson kind of set the tone for me, even though still consciously I was not a militant. I was not trying to be that uppity Negro. That's their word. I mean, my word, that was one of the words they used. But I knew that there was something going on and began to formulate it.
One of the things that sticks out in my mind also is experiencing Georgetown. Prior to coming to Wilson, we had never ventured over to Georgetown. And the only places that black people shopped were 14th Street, which was burned down in the riots. So after attending school in Wilson, it was just really such a shock to come to Georgetown, and we used to come like after school and just be like in awe of Georgetown. But I also became more politically involved, and I guess I became a little bit of a militant during that time. Because by the time I got to AU, I was, you know, the Black Power sign was going up, and the dashikis and the afro, and was part of the Black Student Union, and we had, you know, a lot of issues there. But Wilson, when I was at Roosevelt, I wasn't really politically involved, but Wilson sort of opened my eyes, and I really became more politically involved.
Can you just give me a description of how you maintain your individuality and your colorfulness during this time while you were here, or going about your business, as you would say?
And that other teacher that will go nameless and unknown told me that, well, you know, I think you should only apply to these black colleges because, you know, you're not going to do well with white universities and white schools. And I said, okay, I'm going to make it a point of applying to white schools and universities. I'm going to make it a point of applying to historically black colleges, and we'll see which way things work out. Turned out I was accepted at some Ivy League schools as well as some local schools here. And it just so happened Georgetown University accepted me first. And since they were local, I wanted to stay in the area. I signed up to go to Georgetown, where I met up with some of the same thoughts and feelings and attitudes and mindsets that I first encountered here at Wilson. But individuality, you have to be strong. My parents raised me to be strong. And I owe whatever accomplishments I have achieved, I go back and say that they had a big hand in how I developed and how I turned out. I wasn't going to let racism and somebody's personal bigotry hold me back or keep me down.
I too experienced Wilson as a place with just most of my time was studying and being in activities and clubs to get into a good college. And looking back on it, you know, there are people then and now who, you know, in their free time, and I might have done it if I felt like I had free time, been in like a rock and roll band or something like that. Of course, after 2 years in a good college, I dropped out because I didn't know what I wanted to really go do and study. But you know, I also felt these social pressures of having friends in all the different groups and not feeling like I fit in as a girl anywhere.
So I think my individuality developed at Wilson by being in this incredibly diverse place, maybe the most diverse community I've ever been in. And making friends and meeting people and learning about people, and also, by the way, and as you mentioned, we had a large international community here. So meeting all sorts of people and feeling comfortable, getting to know different people, I think was a great sort of preparation for the world.
For me, my individuality came from my grandmother. It sounds like a good thing, but she was just one of those African-American women who was worked in the White House, and she had a vision of what was good and what was not good. She didn't realize this, but she put a lot of failure messages in our lives of what you can't do, because she knew that a white man could do this, because that's what she saw. So she would say, why are you doing this? You're not gonna make it. Why are you doing that? You're not gonna make it. So by the time I'm in Wilson, I'm going to school. I wasn't up at 4:30, sorry about that. But I was working after school every day and Saturdays. So as she is constantly giving me failure messages, because we lived in the same house, I'm thinking, watch me. So all of a sudden I'm in Wilson, where I'm with this diverse group of people, and one thing I was so grateful for, and I looked at the yearbook just to make sure my head was still in the right place, if I saw things the same way, the ratio of teachers was almost balanced. There were just as many African American teachers as there were white teachers. The principal was black. We had 2.5 vice principals, because Michael Durso was there. I don't know how many of you knew him. So we had enough African American exposure, as well as exposure of every other diversity, to know that, yeah, I can do this no matter who says what. So because my grandmother gave me that push unbeknownst to her, when she said I couldn't, I said I know I can. So no matter who else said I couldn't, I knew I could.
I'm going to echo that. I think my father really gave me my purpose and my strength, and to be an individual. So even at Wilson, and I know a lot of times it's sort of like we were like proud that we were. We were proud that we were black girls here, and we kind of like stood out and kind of just not paraded around, but we were like, okay, we're here, you're gonna deal with us. We're here and we're not going anywhere. And I was always one that didn't want to go with the flow. If the crowd's going this way, I'll go this way. So, and Wilson really helped me to really hone that and to be an individual, and no matter what, and I can stand on my own. And but just the exposure of coming from an all-black school, from elementary through junior high and first year of high school, and then coming to an integrated school, you have to find a way to stick out and to be yourself and to not let people bring you down, because there were some teachers who really tried to bring us down here, and I was determined not to let that happen. And so I really kind of owe that all to my father, because he was like he was a businessman also, and he had a shop on 14th Street during the riots that the only reason it wasn't burned down was because he had a sign out there that said "Soul Brother."
Yes.
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 Yes. And so Soul Brother, right. And so I owe all that to him, to make me a strong person and to be able to come here and still be strong, even though we were in the minority and we faced a lot of obstacles at times, but that's what I owe my strength to.
Now, I've always been an outsider. In my own community, I was too black. I was too black of tone. I was too black of thought, and I had a hungry thirst. I guess what people say, an academician. I loved to read, I loved to learn, and I was on a quest, but it would be years before I understood that quest was to see me in education, to see me in books, to see me on television, to see me in movies in a positive view. So I was too black in my own community, and I've never met a black person like you before in this community. And when people say, I've never met a black person like you before, how many black people do you know? And it's usually either one or none. So there's another thing that helped me keep my individuality. That's right, check it out. I am crazy. I'm not insane, but I'm crazy. I'm an artist. I didn't know it at the time, but I'm an artist. I have the soul and the heart and the mindset of an artist. That's how I wound up being a griot, a master storyteller, a cultural curator, a living library, all that kind of good stuff. So I was, they didn't just crack the mold when they had me. There was no mold. Okay, so that sense of individuality was already there with me. I just didn't know it.
This has been an incredible evening. I want to thank each and every one of the members of the panel. Can we give them applause, please? And I want to thank each of you for staying in with us for so long and for coming out tonight to support this effort.